Hello, welcome back. Second episode of Random Review, and I'm going to be continuing where I left off in regards to the psychedelic electronic genre of my collection. Obviously, I started off with more band orientated works of Osric Tentacles. I hope people found it enjoyable enough, informative enough. I don't know. Feel free to comment. Maybe I'll get round to having a look at those. As stated previously in that episode, I'm going to be carrying on into that kind of area of my collection, and I thought that it would be only appropriate to continue with the mighty Shpongle. It's their second album effort, Tales of the Inexpressible. I believe from what it says, it's from 2001. And essentially, Shpongle is an outfit that's comprised of just two people. It's very possible they have a lot of guest appearances, but as an actual working act, it just consists of two people. Mainly Simon Posford, also of hallucinogen fame. So that's more kind of Goa trance, psychedelic trance acts that he did for in the 90s with a couple of pretty seminal albums actually, and a much older chap by the name of Raja Ram. He's the live flutist within the Shpongle project, and also helps to generate all sorts of concepts and ideas. And obviously, I imagine that him and Simon have quite a fun time bouncing these ideas off of each other and whatnot. To the best of my knowledge, Raja Ram previously had an outfit in the 60s with a group called Quintessence, which was very much a psychedelic rock band with very heavy Hindu influences. Obviously, I'm sure that Raja Ram is not his original name. I think he's from Australia originally by the sound of his accent. So pretty sure that that isn't his birth name. But again, I think it speaks for itself that the Hindu influence was quite strong on him. So again, Tales of the Inexpressible, it's their second album effort. It follows on from the largely successful and highly original Are You Shpongled? Obviously a play on words with Jimi Hendrix Experience. Following on from what they laid down with Tales of the Inexpressible, with Are You Shpongled, it's very much a more varied album, I would say. Again, the first album debut is very interesting. It's quite meandering. There's a lot of very new and original and fresh territories that are kind of laid down on that particular album. Very much a prophetic kind of album of what would be to come throughout their discography. The main reason why I've chosen Tales of the Inexpressible, going to be honest, it's not actually, I wouldn't consider it my favourite album out of Shpongle. However, I think it's arguably, it was their first kind of album where they're really, really starting to play around with quite an immense array of world music influences. I think one of my closest friends had described it when he was originally trying to turn me on to them, was essentially, within the, 85 minutes or so, it might even be longer, but, contained within that album, it takes you on a trip around the entire world. Again, definitely a forerunner of what was to come with their following album as well. Again, it starts off with the Dorset Perception. Again, like to play on words. Obviously, quite a big reference to Aldous Huxley. Obviously, a reference to Dorset. Again, that kind of shows their playful nature. The fact that there's no real vocals, with the exception of maybe a couple of tracks. There's a lot of wordplay that goes on in a lot of their works, and again, it just kind of shows a very playful, kind of whimsical, almost, I want to say, childlike kind of fascination with the world, and I think that kind of really shines through in a lot of the world influences that they have. So Dorset Perception kicks off the album, and it starts off with a very nice kind of flamenco style acoustic guitar intro, and then slowly builds up with things like salsa influences, and it's very bubbly. It's a very playful album, and it kind of delves into a lot of different territories where, you know, there's a lot of ups, there's a lot of downs. There's no single song on it that's alike the song that came previously, and it makes for very interesting listening, I think. So Dorset Perception is quite a strong opening track. Again, heavy use of manipulated vocal samples where the pitch is kind of shifted up. So again, I found it quite hard to get into them. This was my first actual album of trying to get into them when a friend of mine was turning me on to it. And the largest problem that I had with that was actually the pitch shifted vocal samples, mainly because they get pitched up by quite a few octaves. I hate to say this, but my first impressions of hearing that was very reminiscent of that awfully cringy kind of chipmunk kind of voice that you hear in a lot of kind of EDM stuff, or stuff that's not necessarily auto-tuned, but it kind of sounded like that to me to begin with. It took me a long time to kind of get over myself and kind of let the music breathe and kind of speak for itself. So over time, you know, it's become quite an endearing feature in a lot of Simon Posford's music. Again, leading off from Dorset Perception, again kicks up into a very kind of dub influenced track, Star Shpongle Banner as well. Again, quite a lot of use of flutes as well. Again, so a very strange kind of change from the previous kind of flamenco, kind of salsa upbeat nature of the first track. And again, it's iconic as a song, especially, you know, we're dealing with electronic music here, so it's not necessarily a case of like with mainstream like EDM and things like that. There isn't really that kind of structure of verse, chorus. Everything just kind of flows. There might be some slight repetitions that alludes to like beginning parts of songs and whatnot, but largely their albums and more importantly their songs as well is very much a journey. You don't really tend to retread on the same territory. So again, quite an iconic track. And then another immediate shift afterwards with A New Way to Say Hooray, which again, slight play on words, an allusion to Pink Floyd, obviously Piper at the Gates of Dawn with Gnome. And again, starting off a very familiar kind of love affair with this kind of style of music, where they've extensively, artists over the years have kind of plundered Terence McKenna dialogues as well, to the point where it's actually a little bit annoying now. It's always a case of nowadays, now that the years have gone by, that with any Sybian track, I'm always slightly gritting my teeth, where it's like, when are we going to hear that Terence McKenna sample? It's fine when it's been done for the first few years, but when every single artist is pretty much using it, it gets a little tedious. And his accent is very peculiar, shall we say, very nasal. Again, aside from that little critique and criticism, again, a major shift with a lot of kind of African kind of tribal chants and singing samples as well. Very interesting track indeed. Again, coming back to midway through the album with My Head Feels Like a Frisbee. Don't really know how that works, but I'm sure they were not sober when they thought of that. Again, delving very much into kind of salsa, samba kind of territory, so quite a lot of Latino kind of rhythms and whatnot. Again, very, very interesting track. Again, moving on towards the last part of the album, again, not that if I had to hazard a guess, if my intuitions are right with this particular album, I would say that the two last proper album tracks as well. Very much not only standout tracks for myself, but I would say they're probably considered fan favourites as well. And again, one of the very few times where it features guest vocals as well. And given this kind of style of music, when it's done right, it works absolutely fantastically. So we have Once Upon the Sea of Blissful Awareness. And the guest vocalist on this is absolutely sublime. And it really does invoke themes of, I don't know, the only way that I would describe it, again, probably the title track's actually betraying that for me as well, but I do get a very aquatic kind of feeling to it. I think the opening kind of, as the pulsating kind of bass and rhythms kind of start to give way, I kind of do get that feeling of kind of water starting to kind of gently ripple towards you. I think the first time that I was thinking about this inside my head was actually many years ago when I was actually swimming in the sea in Greece, and it was the evening time, and you had the very kind of delicate pink light of a sunset that was kind of bouncing and rippling off that crystal clear water. And yeah, instantly this track kind of came to mind. I was kind of kicking myself that there was no way that I could actually play that song out loud when I'm in the middle of the fucking sea. But yeah, who knows what the future holds. Again, leading into the one song that actually convinced me of that there was something here for me as well. Because like I said previously, it took me a long time to really get into this style of music. My kind of background had always been in things like progressive rock and classic rock. And I mean, my first love affair really was probably about 15 years of only listening to metal and black metal and death metal at that. So I think having that kind of shift where I'm starting to be open to other forms of music, mainly through my friends as well, yeah, it was very difficult, but this one track was the one that really convinced me, and that was, again, another play on words, Around the World in 80 Days. And again, it's pretty evident that they like their wordplay. Again, with this particular song, I would say that it is probably the highlight of the album for me. And I think the real thing that cemented it for me was after the, again, initial Terence McKenna vocal sample that they use. It's just that main melody that kind of chimes in after the guitars. It's so simplistic, but very, very catchy. And again, without copying it, it was very reminiscent of the opening sequence of notes that you would hear in Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells. It's the only way I could describe it, and I absolutely adore that album as well. So that was the initial thing that just kind of made me go, oh, there's something here. I can kind of stick with that and see where it goes. Again, quite a lot of use of vocals in this one as well. I'm not entirely sure what they're singing. It is in a foreign language, maybe an Indian dialect, I would guess. Again, there's a very heavy kind of Indian theme that permeates throughout this song as well. Again, around midway, it kind of gives way into quite a, for Shpongle, I would say a very steady, not heavy, but a very steady kind of pulsating beat that just ever so slightly betrays Simon Posford's musical past with Hallucinogen, but not in the same way as anything like Goa trance or psychedelic trance. And again, wordplay happening again. They finish off with a very short piece simply entitled Flute Fruit, and it's just a very nice, subtle ending to the album of just some solo flute work, care of Raja Ram. Again, like I said, I wouldn't consider it necessarily my favourite album, but purely because of my introduction to the group, I count that as quite important as well. Again, at the same time, it was probably my best friend that actually was the one responsible for constantly pushing this as well, actually, to the point where I guess your ears just eventually cave in like they would do with any other album that was playing, if you eventually, you know, initially it's not really for you, you don't completely dislike it, but you wouldn't really choose to put it on either. But I think after an entire summertime of repeated listens by campfires and all times of the day and night, it definitely did something. And again, much like a lot of groups and musical journeys that people take in their lives, once something's kind of set in stone, that tends to be it, doesn't it? You know, you get to some particular stage where it's like, well, you know, something's working here, and I like them, and I'm going to pursue their music from here on out. As far as I know, as an actual musical venture, to the best of my knowledge, they dabbled with the idea of only being around for a short amount of time. I think it was originally intended to stop their musical venture after their third album, Nothing Lasts and Nothing Is Lost. And initially, I think that the general kind of consensus among their fan base was, you know, obviously, when I say upset, not in a kind of pitchfork and torches way, but I think Rajaram and Simon Posford did kind of realise actually this means quite a lot to people, and you know, if there's still some ideas floating around, then why not continue as Shpongle? They did continue for a further 3 or 4 albums, I believe. But as far as I know, I think the band is currently on hiatus now at the moment. I think the last thing that Simon Posford did was a solo album under the working name of just Simon Posford during the initial lockdown of 2020 to 2021. Again, quite an interesting little kind of album as well in its own right. Right, so that continues my episode of random reviews, and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you.